A grieving nation, Prince William and Princess Kate, deliver a united, poised farewell. The morning fog hung heavy over London as news spread through the ancient corridors of Buckingham Palace. Staff members moved with unusual urgency, their footsteps echoing against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. In the private quarters, Prince William sat in his study, staring at the official documents that would change everything. The words seemed to blur together as he read them for the third time, each sentence carrying the weight of finality. Princess Kate found him there, still in the same position she had left him hours earlier. Her gentle hand on his shoulder was all the communication they needed in that moment. The couple had faced many challenges together, but nothing had prepared them for this overwhelming responsibility. The nation would look to them for strength, for guidance, for hope during one of its darkest hours. The palace communications team had already begun drafting statements, but William knew that words on paper could never capture what the people truly needed to hear. He stood slowly, his tall frame casting long shadows across the room as morning light filtered through tall windows. Kate watched him carefully, reading the determination that was slowly replacing the initial shock in his eyes. Outside, crowds were already beginning to gather. News vans lined the street, reporters speaking in hushed tones into their cameras. The world was watching, waiting for the royal family's response to the tragedy that had shaken the very foundations of the monarchy. Social media buzzed with speculation and grief, millions of messages pouring in from every corner of the globe. In the palace kitchen, staff prepared tea with trembling hands. The head chef, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, found himself wiping away tears as he arranged the simple breakfast that would likely go untouched. Everyone felt the weight of history pressing down upon them. This was not just another day in the life of the royal household. This was a moment that would define generations to come. William's phone buzzed constantly with messages from world leaders, family members, and close friends. Each offered condolences and support, but he knew that ultimately, the burden of addressing the nation fell squarely on his shoulders. Kate sat beside him, her presence providing the calm strength he had always drawn from her. Together, they began to plan how they would guide their country through this unprecedented time. The palace's senior advisors arrived one by one, their faces grave and their voices low. They spoke of protocols and procedures, of historical precedents, and constitutional requirements. But William found himself thinking beyond the formal obligations. He thought about the families who were grieving, the communities that were struggling to make sense of what had happened, the children who would grow up with this tragedy as part of their national story. As the hours passed, more details emerged about the full scope of what had occurred. Each new piece of information seemed to deepen the complexity of the situation they faced. Kate took notes in her careful handwriting, organizing thoughts and considerations that would need to be addressed in the coming days. Her calm demeanor masked the turmoil she felt inside, but she knew that showing strength was part of her duty to both her husband and her country. The first official meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Representatives from Parliament, the Church of England, and various government departments would gather to discuss the immediate response. William straightened his tie and checked his appearance in the mirror one final time. He saw his father's eyes looking back at him, and for a moment felt the full weight of the legacy he was inheriting under such tragic circumstances. Kate appeared beside him in the mirror, her reflection completing the image of partnership that had come to define their public presence. She wore a simple black dress, appropriate for the solemnity of the day, with her grandmother's pearl earrings, a small connection to family history that provided comfort in uncertain times. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her makeup was minimal but flawless. The walk to the meeting room felt longer than usual. Palace staff they passed offered quiet nods of respect and support. The ancient portraits lining the hallways, seemed to watch their progress, generations of monarchs who had faced their own moments of crisis and triumph. William found strength in knowing that he was part of this continuous line of service to the British people. As they entered the meeting room, the assembled officials rose respectfully. William took his place at the head of the table, with Kate beside him. The gravity of the moment was reflected in every face around the room. These were experienced people who had served through various crises, but everyone understood that they were entering uncharted territory. The first reports were devastating in their detail. The scope of the loss was even greater than initially feared, and the implications would ripple through British society for years to come. William listened intently to each presentation, asking thoughtful questions and taking careful notes. Kate observed the reactions of those around the table, gauging the emotional temperature of the room and the confidence levels of the various officials. When the formal presentations concluded, William spoke for the first time since the meeting began. His voice was steady and clear, reflecting the composure that years of public service had taught him. He outlined his initial thoughts about how they should proceed, emphasizing the importance of honesty, transparency, and genuine connection with the people they served. The discussion that followed was intense and far-ranging. Constitutional experts weighed in on precedents, communications specialists offered advice on public messaging, and security officials outlined the practical considerations that would shape their public appearances. Through it all, William and Kate remained focused on their central question: how could they best serve their grieving nation? As evening approached and the meeting finally concluded, the couple found themselves alone again in their private quarters. The magnitude of what lay ahead was becoming clearer with each passing hour. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult decisions, and the beginning of what they both knew would be a long journey toward healing and renewal. Outside their windows, London continued its evening rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. The city, like the nation it represented, was processing grief and looking toward its leaders for guidance. William and Kate understood that their response in the coming days would either unite the country in its time of sorrow or allow divisions to deepen during vulnerability. They spent the final hours of that first day in quiet preparation, knowing that when tomorrow's sun rose, they would step forward together to address a nation in mourning, carrying with them the hopes and expectations of millions who were counting on their strength, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to service above self. A grieving nation. Prince William and Princess Kate deliver a united, poised farewell. Part 2 dawn broke gray and somber over Buckingham Palace as Prince William stood at his bedroom window, watching the city slowly come to life. The streets below were already filling with people carrying flowers, many wearing black armbands or holding photographs. The spontaneous outpouring of grief had continued through the night, with makeshift memorials appearing on street corners throughout London and across the kingdom. Kate emerged from the dressing room, having spent extra time that morning ensuring every detail of her appearance would convey the right message. She had chosen a navy blue coat dress, respectful yet approachable, paired with her late mother-in-law's sapphire earrings. The jewelry choice was deliberate, a subtle reminder of continuity and the enduring nature of royal service, even in, times of profound loss. The breakfast table was set with the usual precision, but the morning newspapers painted a stark picture of a nation in shock. Headlines screamed in bold letters, photographs captured the raw emotion of ordinary citizens, and editorial columns called for leadership during this unprecedented crisis. William scanned the articles quickly, noting the tone and tenor of public discourse that was already beginning to emerge. Their press secretary arrived earlier than scheduled, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. She carried a thick folder containing initial drafts of the statement they would deliver later that day, along with detailed analyses of public sentiment gathered from social media monitoring and overnight polling. The data painted a complex picture of a population seeking both comfort and answers. Kate reviewed the draft speech carefully, making notes in the margins with her characteristic attention to detail. She understood that every word would be scrutinized, analyzed, and remembered. The challenge was crafting language that would acknowledge the depth of the tragedy while offering hope for the future. Her background in art history had taught her to appreciate the power of symbols and imagery, skills that proved invaluable in royal communications. The morning briefing with senior staff revealed the logistical complexity of the days ahead. Security. Protocols needed to be adjusted to accommodate increased public gatherings. International delegations were requesting meetings to express condolences. Memorial services required coordination across multiple venues. The machinery of state funeral planning, dormant for years, was suddenly activated with urgent efficiency. William found himself thinking about his grandmother's words during previous times of national difficulty. She had always emphasized that the monarchy's role during crisis was to provide stability, continuity, and a sense of shared purpose. These principles would guide his approach, but he also recognized that his generation would need to express them in ways that resonated with contemporary Britain. The couple's first public appearance was scheduled for 11 o'clock at the impromptu memorial growing outside Westminster Abbey. They would walk among the crowds, accept flowers and condolences, and offer comfort to those who had come to express their grief. It was a delicate balance, being accessible while maintaining the dignity of their positions, showing emotion while projecting strength. As they prepared to leave the palace, William adjusted his black tie one final time. The simple gesture reminded him of countless formal occasions throughout his life, but none had carried such weight. Kate checked her small clutch bag, ensuring she had tissues readily available, not just for herself, but for the many people they would encounter who were struggling with their emotions. The car journey to Westminster Abbey was quiet, except for the low murmur of radio chatter from their security detail. Through tinted windows, they could see the crowds growing larger as they approached their destination. Police barriers had been erected to manage the flow of people, but the atmosphere was one of respectful gathering rather than chaotic urgency. Upon arrival, the couple was briefed quickly by the senior police commander on site. The crowd was estimated at over 10,000 people, with more arriving constantly. Representatives from various community organizations were present, as were families who had been directly affected by the tragedy. The diversity of the gathering reflected the broad impact of the loss the nation was experiencing. Their first steps into the crowd were met with a hush that gradually gave way to gentle applause and words of encouragement. William and Kate moved, slowly, stopping frequently to speak with individuals and accept the flowers, cards, and small gifts that people had brought. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, a moment of human connection during an overwhelmingly difficult time. Kate knelt down to speak with a young girl who had drawn a picture, her small hands shaking as she offered her artwork to the princess. The image showed a rainbow over a castle, with stick figures holding hands beneath it. Kate accepted the drawing with genuine warmth, taking time to admire the child's work and ask about her favorite colors. These small moments of normalcy provided brief respite from the gravity of the larger situation. William engaged in conversation with an elderly man who had served in the military, their discussion ranging from shared service experiences to hopes for the future. The veteran's eyes filled with tears as he spoke about his pride in his country and his confidence in the royal family's leadership during difficult times. These personal testimonies reinforced William's understanding of the responsibility he carried. As they moved through the crowd, local news cameras captured intimate moments of the royal couple, offering comfort and receiving expressions of support. The images would later be broadcast around the world, providing a visual narrative of a nation coming together in its time of need. Kate's gentle demeanor and William's steady presence created a sense of calm authority that seemed to resonate with those present. The memorial itself had grown organically throughout the morning. Flowers covered nearly every available surface, creating a carpet of color against the stone facades of the historic buildings. Handwritten notes and photographs were carefully placed among the floral tributes, each representing a personal connection to the larger tragedy that had befallen the nation. After spending nearly 2 hours among the crowds, William and Kate made their way to the steps of Westminster Abbey for a brief address. No podium had been erected. They would speak directly to the gathered people, creating an atmosphere of intimacy despite the scale of the audience. Television cameras positioned at various angles would carry their words to millions more watching, from homes across the country and around the world. The couple stood together, William slightly forward, Kate beside and just behind him in the traditional positioning that had become familiar to the British public. The crowd fell silent as William began to speak, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. His words were measured and sincere, acknowledging the pain while emphasizing the strength that came from unity and shared purpose. Kate stepped forward when William concluded, adding her own brief remarks focused on the importance of supporting one another through grief and the role that community connections would play in healing. Her voice was warm but controlled, each word carefully chosen to provide comfort without minimizing the significance of the loss that everyone was experiencing. The response from the crowd was immediate and emotional. Applause mixed with tears, as people felt heard and acknowledged by their future monarchs. Many in the audience later reported feeling that the royal couple truly understood their pain and were committed to leading the nation through this difficult period with wisdom and compassion. As they prepared to leave Westminster Abbey, William and Kate took one final walk through the memorial area, pausing to read some of the messages and observe the continuing stream of people arriving to pay their respects. The afternoon would bring meetings with government officials, religious leaders, and international representatives, but this morning among their people had provided the foundation for everything that would follow. A grieving nation, Prince William and Princess Kate, deliver a united, poised farewell. Part 3. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Clarence House as Prince William and Princess Kate returned from their mourning among the grieving crowds. The weight of thousands of personal interactions still lingered in the air around them, each handshake and tear-filled conversation adding layers to their understanding of the nation's pain. Kate set down her small clutch bag, now heavy with folded notes pressed into her hands by well-wishers, each one a testament to the individual stories of loss that comprise the larger national tragedy. William loosened his black tie slightly, the first moment of physical relaxation he had allowed himself since dawn. The morning's public appearance had been emotionally draining, but it had also provided crucial insight into the mood of the people they would soon lead through this unprecedented crisis. Their private secretary was already waiting with updates from other royal family members who had made similar appearances across the country, all reporting the same mixture of grief, confusion, and desperate hope for guidance. The couple had barely settled when their communications director arrived with urgent news about the international response. Messages of condolence were pouring in from heads of state, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens from around the globe. The Queen of Denmark had requested a private telephone conversation. The President of France was preparing a special address to express solidarity with Britain, and the Pope had announced plans for a special prayer service at the Vatican. Kate reviewed the list of international responses while William studied the latest security briefings. The global nature of the support was both comforting and overwhelming. They were reminded that their actions in the coming days would be watched not just by their own people, but by billions around the world who saw Britain's royal family as symbols of stability and continuity in an increasingly uncertain world. The afternoon schedule included a series of private meetings with key figures from British society. The Archbishop of Canterbury was first to arrive, his usually serene demeanor marked by the gravity of his mission to help provide spiritual guidance during the nation's time of need. He and William discussed the theological aspects of public grief, the role of faith in healing communities, and the practical considerations for memorial services that would need to accommodate people of all faiths and none. Kate joined their conversation, sharing observations from the morning about the diverse range of people who had gathered at Westminster Abbey. She had noticed families from various ethnic and religious backgrounds, young and old, wealthy and working class, all united in their need to express grief and seek comfort. The Archbishop nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the challenge of crafting services and messages that would resonate across such diversity while maintaining the dignity and tradition that people expected from royal occasions. Their next meeting was with the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who briefed them on the government's response plans and the coordination between political and royal duties during the crisis. The conversation revealed the delicate balance that would need to be maintained between the royal family's ceremonial role and the government's practical responsibilities. William asked probing questions about resource allocation, public safety measures, and the timeline for various memorial events. As the afternoon progressed, representatives from major charities and community organizations arrived to discuss their role in supporting affected communities. Kate took the lead in these conversations, her extensive charity work having given her deep insights into how grassroots organizations could mobilize during emergencies. She made detailed notes about coordination mechanisms, funding needs, and ways the royal family could amplify the work of these essential groups. The most emotionally challenging meeting came when they received a small delegation of families who had been directly affected by the tragedy. William and Kate listened intently as each person shared their story, their loss, and their hopes for how the nation might honor those they had lost. These personal testimonies reinforced the human dimension of their public role and the real-world impact of the decisions they would make in the coming days. One elderly woman spoke about her grandson, a young man who had dedicated his life to public service before becoming a victim of the tragedy. She pressed a photograph into Kate's hands, explaining that she wanted the royal family to know that each statistic represented a real person with dreams, families, and contributions to make to society. Kate accepted the photograph with visible emotion, promising that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. A middle-aged father described the impact on his community, explaining how neighbors were supporting each other but struggling with questions about why such tragedy had occurred. William responded with careful words about the importance of coming together during difficult times and the role that community connections play in helping people process grief and begin healing. His response was heartfelt but measured, recognizing the limits of what any leader could offer in the face of such profound loss. Between meetings, William and Kate had brief moments to process what they were hearing and adjust their understanding of the situation. The personal stories were more complex and varied than any briefing document could capture. Each family's experience was unique, yet common themes emerged about the need for acknowledgement, support, and hope for the future. Late in the afternoon, they met with senior military officials to discuss the logistical requirements for the state, ceremonies that would mark the nation's formal farewell. The conversation covered everything from parade routes to security protocols, from international delegation accommodations to media management. Kate asked detailed questions about accessibility provisions, ensuring that people with disabilities would be able to participate fully in public memorial events. The military briefing included sensitive information about intelligence assessments and ongoing investigations related to the tragedy. William listened gravely as officials outlined what was known and what remained uncertain. The complexity of the situation was becoming clearer with each additional briefing, and he understood that public communications would need to balance transparency with security considerations. As evening approached, the couple finally had a private moment to reflect on the day's events. They sat together in their private sitting room, surrounded by the accumulated materials from various meetings, briefing papers, photographs, handwritten notes, and symbolic gifts from the morning's public interactions. The physical objects told the story of a day spent bridging the gap between personal grief and public responsibility. Kate sorted through the messages and small gifts they had received, reading selected passages aloud to William. Many were simple, expressions of support and condolence, but others contained suggestions, questions, and requests for specific actions. The range of communication reflected the diversity of perspectives they would need to consider as they crafted their public response to the crisis. William worked on his notes for the major address he would deliver the following evening, incorporating themes and insights from the day's conversations. The speech would need to acknowledge the full scope of the tragedy while offering realistic hope for the future. It would need to honor those lost while inspiring those who remained to work together toward healing and renewal. Their private secretary returned with updates on arrangements for the next day, which would include visits to affected communities outside London and meetings with international delegations. The schedule was demanding, but both William and Kate understood that their presence and attention during this critical period would help shape the nation's collective memory of the tragedy and its aftermath. As they prepared for dinner, Kate reflected on the remarkable resilience she had witnessed throughout the day. Despite their profound grief, people had shown kindness to strangers, supported their neighbors, and maintained hope for the future. These observations would inform her own public statements and help guide the charitable initiatives she would launch in response to the crisis. The evening news broadcasts provided their first glimpse of how the day's events were being perceived by the broader public. Commentary was generally positive, with observers noting the royal couple's genuine engagement with grieving citizens and their measured response to an unprecedented situation. However, they also recognized that public opinion would evolve as the crisis continued, and their leadership would be judged ultimately by results rather than intentions. A grieving nation, Prince William and Princess Kate, deliver a united, poised farewell. Part 4. The third day dawned with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself was offering a small comfort to the grieving nation. Prince William stood in his study, reviewing the final draft of the address he would deliver that evening to the country and the Commonwealth. The speech had gone through 17 revisions, each word carefully chosen to strike the delicate balance between acknowledging profound loss and inspiring hope for the future. Kate sat nearby, adding her own thoughtful edits to the margins, her input invaluable in ensuring the message would resonate with the diverse audience who would be listening. The morning brought news that memorial gatherings had spontaneously organized in cities across the Commonwealth. From Sydney to Toronto, from Mumbai to Cape Town, British expatriates and local citizens alike were holding vigils and services to express solidarity with the homeland during its time of crisis. The global response reinforced the international significance of the tragedy and the widespread recognition of the royal family's role in providing moral leadership during dark times. Kate's lady-in-waiting arrived with updates on the charitable response that was already beginning to take shape. Donations were pouring into established relief funds, new volunteer organizations were forming to support affected communities, and businesses were pledging resources for long-term recovery efforts. The princess had spent hours the previous evening working with charity coordinators to ensure that the goodwill and generosity being expressed could be channeled effectively toward helping those most in need. Their first appointment of the day was with a group of children from a local school whose teacher had been among those lost in the tragedy. William and Kate had specifically requested this meeting, understanding that young people would need special attention as the nation processed its grief. The children, ranging in age from 7 to 11, had prepared drawings and written letters, expressing their feelings about what had happened and their hopes for the future. The meeting took place in a small, comfortable room at Clarence House, away from the formal staterooms that might intimidate the young visitors. Kate sat on the floor with several of the children, admiring their artwork and listening as they shared memories of their beloved teacher. One little girl had drawn a picture of an angel with wings made of flowers, explaining that she believed their teacher was now watching over them from heaven. Kate accepted the drawing with visible emotion, promising to keep it in a special place. William engaged the older children in conversation about their feelings and their questions about why sad things sometimes happen to good people. His responses were honest but age-appropriate, emphasizing the importance of remembering happy times while acknowledging that feeling sad was normal and healthy. One boy asked if the king and queen also felt scared sometimes, and William's honest admission that everyone, including royals, experienced fear and sadness seemed to provide comfort to the group. The children presented a collective gift, a handmade book containing stories, poems, and pictures they had created in memory of their teacher. Each page revealed the impact one dedicated educator had made on young lives, providing a powerful reminder of how individual losses rippled through communities in ways that statistics could never capture. Kate promised to share the book with other schools and teachers across the country who were also dealing with loss and trauma. After the children departed, William and Kate had a brief moment to compose themselves before their next engagement. The meeting had been emotionally draining, but also inspiring, demonstrating the resilience and wisdom that young people could display even during the most difficult circumstances. Their innocence and hope provided a powerful counterbalance to the cynicism and despair that crisis could breed among adults. The afternoon brought a series of meetings with international dignitaries who had traveled to London to express their condolences and support. The King of Sweden was first to arrive, followed by delegations from Germany, Ireland, and Australia. Each meeting followed similar patterns: formal expressions of sympathy, offers of assistance, and discussions about how the international community could support Britain during its recovery process. Kate played a crucial role in these diplomatic encounters, her natural warmth and cultural awareness helping to create connections that went beyond formal protocol. Her conversations with the Swedish Queen about shared experiences of public service during crises provided valuable insights that she would later incorporate into her own approach to the situation. The German Chancellor's wife shared practical advice about supporting families affected by national tragedies based on her country's experience with similar challenges. The most significant international meeting was with representatives from the United States, including the President's special envoy and the British-born Hollywood actress who served as a goodwill ambassador. The American delegation brought not only official condolences, but also concrete offers of assistance, including specialized counseling services for trauma victims and logistical support for memorial events. William was particularly grateful for the practical nature of their support, recognizing that healing would require more than symbolic gestures. Between diplomatic meetings, William had telephone conversations with other Commonwealth leaders who couldn't travel to London immediately, but wanted to express their support personally. The Prime Minister of Canada shared his experience leading his country through a similar tragedy several years earlier, offering specific advice about managing public grief while maintaining governmental stability. The Australian Prime Minister pledged resources for memorial events and ongoing support for affected families. Late in the afternoon, William and Kate traveled to Windsor Castle for final preparations before the evening's televised address. The key location had been chosen carefully. The historic castle represented continuity and stability, while its more intimate scale would create a warmer atmosphere than Buckingham Palace might provide. The television production team had been working since dawn to ensure that lighting, sound, and camera angles would create the appropriate mood for such a solemn occasion. Kate spent time reviewing her own brief remarks that would follow William's main address. Her role was to speak specifically to families, children, and communities about the practical aspects of healing and recovery. She had incorporated many of the insights gained from her recent meetings, including specific resources that would be available and ways that ordinary citizens could support their neighbors during the difficult weeks ahead. The speech location was the grand reception room, its elegant but not overwhelming decor providing an appropriate backdrop for the historic address. William stood at a simple lectern, with Kate positioned slightly to his side and behind him. The arrangement was designed to convey unity and partnership while maintaining the constitutional proprieties that govern such formal communications. As the final countdown began, William took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera lens, knowing that millions of people across Britain and around the world would be watching for signs of strength, wisdom, and hope. The red recording light illuminated, and he began to speak with the voice of a future king addressing his people during one of their darkest hours. His words flowed naturally despite the formal setting, each sentence building upon the previous, one to create a narrative of acknowledgement, comfort, and cautious optimism. He spoke about the individuals who had been lost, the communities that were suffering, and the strength he had witnessed during his recent interactions with grieving citizens. His delivery was measured and sincere, avoiding both excessive emotion and cold detachment. Kate's portion of the address focused on practical matters, the resources being mobilized to support affected families, the coordination between charitable organizations and government agencies, and the ways that ordinary citizens could contribute to recovery efforts. Her tone was warm but authoritative, providing specific information while maintaining the emotional connection that had characterized her public appearances throughout the crisis. The concluding portion of the address was delivered jointly with William and Kate, alternating brief segments that emphasized themes of unity, resilience, and shared commitment to honoring those lost by building a stronger, more compassionate society. The words had been carefully crafted to inspire action rather than passive sympathy, encouraging viewers to see themselves as participants in the healing process rather than merely observers of tragedy. As the television lights dimmed and the recording session concluded, William and Kate remained standing together for several moments, allowing the weight of what they had just accomplished to settle around them. The address would be broadcast within the hour, carrying their message to audiences across the Commonwealth and around the world. They had done everything possible to strike the right tone and provide the leadership their people needed, but the ultimate judgment would rest with those who heard their words during their own moments of grief and uncertainty. The morning of the fourth day brought both relief and apprehension, as early reports suggested the previous evening's address had been well received across Britain and throughout the Commonwealth. Prince William woke before dawn, unable to sleep, as his mind processed the flood of feedback that had already begun arriving through official channels. Social media monitoring showed overwhelmingly positive responses, with millions of people sharing clips from the speech and expressing gratitude for the royal couple's words of comfort and guidance. Kate found him in the breakfast room, already, dressed and reviewing overnight correspondence from world leaders who had watched the address. The President of Ireland had sent a handwritten note praising the speech's balance of grief and hope, while the Prime Minister of New Zealand had called it exactly what the world needed to hear from Britain's future leaders. These international responses were gratifying, but both William and Kate knew that the real test would be whether their words translated into meaningful action for those who needed help most. The morning's first engagement took them to a community center in East London, where local volunteers had established a support hub for families affected by the tragedy. The center buzzed with activity as counselors, social workers, and ordinary citizens worked together to provide practical assistance and emotional support. William and Kate moved through the facility quietly, observing the work being done and speaking with both volunteers and those seeking help. In one corner of the center, Kate found a group of women who had lost family members organizing care packages for other grieving families. Their leader, a grandmother whose son had perished in the tragedy, explained how keeping busy with helpful activities was part of her own healing process. She pressed a small handmade card into Kate's hands, explaining that creating something beautiful from her pain helped her feel that her son's death had not been entirely meaningless. William spent time with a group of men who had formed an informal support network after realizing they were struggling to process their grief alone. Their conversations revealed the particular challenges that men faced in expressing vulnerability and seeking help during times of trauma. One participant, a construction worker who had never spoken publicly about his emotions, found himself in tears as he described how the royal couple's speech had given him permission to acknowledge his pain openly. The visit to the community center provided crucial insights into how grassroots organizations were responding to the crisis. Kate took detailed notes about successful programs that could be replicated in other communities, while William made mental notes about policy changes that might be needed to support these vital local initiatives. Both recognized that their role extended beyond symbolic leadership to include practical advocacy for resources and systems that could help people heal. Their next stop was a local school where teachers and students were struggling to return to normal routines while processing their collective grief. The headmaster explained how they had modified curriculum and schedules to accommodate the emotional needs of students and staff members. Some children were having difficulty concentrating on academic work, while others seemed determined to maintain normalcy through familiar activities and structures. Kate spent significant time in the art therapy classroom, where students of various ages were creating works that expressed their feelings about recent events. The artwork ranged from dark, abstract pieces reflecting confusion and fear to brighter images depicting hope and community solidarity. She was particularly moved by a collaborative mural that showed hands of different colors reaching toward each other across a stormy sky, with a rainbow beginning to emerge in the distance. William addressed the entire school assembly, speaking directly to the students about the importance of taking care of each other during difficult times. His message emphasized that showing kindness, asking for help when needed, and maintaining hope for the future were all acts of courage that could honor those who had been lost. The students listened intently, many asking thoughtful questions about leadership, responsibility, and how young people could contribute to healing their communities. The afternoon brought them to a hospital where medical staff had been working around the clock to care for those injured in the tragedy. William and Kate moved through the wards quietly, speaking with patients, families, and healthcare workers who had been pushed to their limits by the demands of the crisis. The dedication and professionalism they witnessed provided inspiring examples of ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. In the intensive care unit, they met the family of a young teacher who remained in critical condition. The woman's parents had been maintaining a bedside vigil for days, taking turns reading aloud from her favorite books in hopes that familiar voices might help her recovery. Kate sat with the mother for several minutes, listening as she shared stories about her daughter's dedication to her students and her dream of establishing a literacy program for disadvantaged children. William spent time with the medical staff, learning about the specific challenges they faced in treating trauma victims while managing their own emotional responses to the tragedy. Several nurses and doctors spoke about the psychological toll of caring for so many seriously injured patients while worrying about the broader implications of what had occurred. The conversation reinforced his understanding that healing would require attention to the needs of caregivers as well as direct victims. The hospital visit concluded with a brief gathering in the staff break room, where William and Kate expressed their gratitude to the medical team and listened as healthcare workers shared their perspectives on the community's response to the crisis. Many spoke about the remarkable generosity they had witnessed, from blood donors who lined up for hours to local restaurants that provided free meals for families of patients. These stories of human kindness provided much-needed counterbalances to the darkness of the overall situation. Late in the afternoon, they returned to Windsor Castle for final preparations ahead of the next day's state memorial service. The event would mark the formal conclusion of the national mourning period and the beginning of the recovery phase. Logistics coordinators briefed them on the complex arrangements that would accommodate thousands of attendees while ensuring appropriate security and dignity for such a solemn occasion. The memorial service had evolved into something much larger than originally planned, reflecting the scope of national and international interest in participating. Representatives from every commonwealth nation would attend, along with delegations from dozens of other countries. Religious leaders from multiple faiths had collaborated to create a service that would honor all victims regardless of their personal beliefs, while maintaining the traditional elements that British citizens expected from such occasions. Kate reviewed the detailed program, noting the careful balance between formal ceremonial elements and personal touches that would make the service meaningful to ordinary families. Children's choirs from affected communities would perform. Artwork created by young people would be displayed throughout the venue, and brief readings would be delivered by family members representing different regions and backgrounds. These personal elements would ensure that the ceremony honored individuals rather than treating the tragedy as an abstract national event. William worked with military advisors on the final details of the ceremonial procession that would precede the service. The route had been carefully planned to pass through neighborhoods that had been particularly affected by the tragedy, allowing local communities to participate directly in the national moment of remembrance. Street barriers would be minimal, encouraging a sense of shared participation rather than creating divisions between official participants and ordinary citizens. The evening brought a private dinner with key figures who would play important roles in the next day's service. The Archbishop of Canterbury discussed the spiritual themes that would be emphasized, focusing on messages of healing, forgiveness, and renewed commitment to the common good. The Master of Music from Westminster Abbey explained how the musical selections would create emotional moments while avoiding overwhelming grief that might make the service unbearable for those most deeply affected. International guests began arriving throughout the evening, each delegation bringing their own expressions of solidarity and support. The President of France had arrived with a small gift for William and Kate, a book of condolence messages written by French school children who wanted to express their sympathy to their British counterparts. The gesture was simple, but deeply moving, representing the genuine concern that ordinary people around the world felt for Britain during its time of suffering. As the day concluded, William and Kate spent time reviewing the personal messages they had received from families of victims who would be attending the next day's service. These letters provided insight into the diverse ways that different people were processing their grief and what they hoped to gain from the formal memorial. Some sought closure and a sense of finality, while others wanted assurance that their loved ones would be remembered and that their deaths would lead to positive changes in society. The couple's final task of the evening was reviewing their own roles in the next day's ceremony. William would deliver a brief address focusing on themes of national unity and renewed purpose, while Kate would participate in the symbolic lighting of a memorial flame that would burn permanently in memory of those lost. Both understood that their participation would be closely watched for signs of the leadership qualities that would be needed as they assumed greater responsibilities in the years ahead. Their private secretary provided updates on the media coverage that would surround the next day's events. International television networks were preparing special programming, while social media platforms had created dedicated spaces for people to share their own memories and reflections. The global attention was both humbling and challenging as it increased the pressure to ensure that every element of the service would appropriately honor both the victims and the values they represented. Before retiring for the evening, William and Kate took a quiet walk through the gardens at Windsor Castle, needing a few moments of peace before the intensity of the next day's events. The evening air was filled with the scent of late-blooming flowers, a reminder that life continued its cycles even during humanity's darkest moments. They spoke quietly about their hopes for the memorial service and their long-term vision for how the nation might emerge stronger from its current trials. The night sky was clear, stars visible despite the glow from London in the distance. Both found comfort in the vast perspective that astronomy provided, a reminder that human troubles, however serious, were part of a larger story that stretched across time and space. This broader view would inform their approach to the next day's challenges, helping them maintain the dignified perspective that their people needed from their leaders during times of crisis and uncertainty. The Mourning of the State. Memorial service dawned with a gentle mist that seemed to wrap Westminster Abbey in a shroud of quiet reverence. Prince William stood at his window, watching as the early morning preparations unfolded below. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, while florists made final adjustments to the elaborate displays that would honor the victims of the tragedy. The weight of the day ahead pressed upon his shoulders, but alongside the burden came a deep sense of purpose and determination to lead his nation through this final formal act of mourning. Kate emerged from her dressing room wearing an elegant, black coat dress that struck the perfect balance between solemnity and dignity. Her choice of jewelry was deeply symbolic, a brooch that had belonged to the Queen Mother, connecting her to the long tradition of royal women who had provided comfort during national crises. Her hair was arranged in a simple chignon, and her makeup was flawless yet understated, appropriate for a day that would be remembered in history books and family photo albums alike. The breakfast table was set with unusual care, though both knew that neither would have much appetite given the emotional demands of the day ahead. Their private secretary arrived with final updates on the international delegations that had gathered in London, representing over 60 countries that wanted to show solidarity with Britain during its time of grief. The diversity of the gathering reflected the global impact of the tragedy and the widespread respect for the royal family's handling of the crisis. Their first stop of the day was a private meeting with families of the victims, held in a quiet room at Clarence House, away from the media attention that would surround the public memorial. This intimate gathering allowed for personal conversations that would be impossible during the larger ceremony. William and Kate moved slowly through the group, spending individual time with each family and listening to their stories, their memories, and their hopes for how their loved ones would be remembered. One elderly couple shared photographs of their son, a young police officer who had died while helping others escape the tragedy. Their pride in his heroism was evident, but so was their profound grief at losing their only child. Kate spent several minutes looking through their photo album, asking questions about his childhood and his dreams for the future. The conversation was painful but necessary, providing the human context that would inform the royal couple's public remarks later in the day. A young widow brought her 2 small children, explaining that she wanted them to meet the future king and queen so they would always remember that their father's sacrifice had been acknowledged at the highest levels of society. William knelt down to speak with the children, his natural ease with young people helping to create a moment of connection despite the tragic circumstances that had brought them together. The children presented him with a drawing they had made of their father in his uniform, which William accepted with visible emotion. After the private meetings concluded, William and Kate made their way to Westminster Abbey, where thousands of people had already gathered for the state memorial service. The procession route was lined with silent crowds, many holding flowers or photographs of those they had lost. The atmosphere was one of respectful grief rather than celebration, but the massive turnout demonstrated the nation's need to participate collectively in honoring the victims and beginning the healing process. Inside the Abbey, the scene was both magnificent and heartbreaking. The ancient building had been transformed with floral displays and memorial elements that honored both individual victims and the broader impact of the tragedy. Representatives from every level of British society were present, from government ministers and military leaders to ordinary citizens who had been personally affected by the events. The diversity of the congregation reflected the democratic nature of the grief that had touched all corners of the nation. Kate's role in lighting the memorial flame was scheduled early in the service, symbolically beginning the formal ceremonies that would follow. She approached the altar with measured steps, her composure perfect despite the emotional weight of the moment. The flame, once lit, would burn permanently as a reminder of those lost and a symbol of the nation's commitment to the values they had represented. Her hands were steady as she performed the lighting, and the gentle glow that resulted seemed to fill the entire abbey with warmth and hope. William's address came near the conclusion of the service, after musical performances, readings, and prayers that had gradually built the emotional arc of the ceremony. He stood at the pulpit, where centuries of monarchs and religious leaders had delivered historic speeches, knowing that his words would be remembered long after the immediate crisis had passed. His voice was clear and strong as he spoke about the individual lives that had been lost, the communities that had been affected, and the strength he had witnessed during the nation's darkest hour. The speech carefully balanced acknowledgement of loss with inspiration for the future. William spoke about the ordinary heroism he had observed during his visits to affected communities, the generosity of spirit that had emerged during the crisis, and the resilience that would carry Britain forward into better times. He emphasized that honoring the victims required more than memorial services. It demanded a renewed commitment to the values of service, compassion, and community solidarity that the lost had exemplified in their lives. Kate's brief remarks followed, focusing specifically on the role of families and communities in the healing process. She announced the establishment of new charitable initiatives that would provide long-term support for affected families while also creating educational programs to ensure that the lessons learned from the tragedy would benefit future generations. Her tone was warm but authoritative, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had emerged during her public appearances throughout the crisis. The service concluded with the national anthem, sung by the entire congregation with an emotional intensity that reflected both grief and hope. As the final notes echoed through the abbey, many people remained standing in silent contemplation, reluctant to end this collective moment of remembrance and unity. The royal couple remained at their places for several minutes, allowing the gravity of the occasion to settle before beginning the formal recessional that would mark the end of the official mourning period. Outside the abbey, William and Kate spent additional time greeting members of the public who had gathered to witness the conclusion of the memorial service. These informal interactions provided a final opportunity for direct connection with ordinary citizens who had been affected by the tragedy. Many people thanked them for their leadership during the crisis, while others shared personal stories or asked questions about the support services that would be available in the coming months. The afternoon brought a series of private meetings, with international delegations who wanted to express their condolences personally and discuss ongoing cooperation in addressing the issues that had contributed to the tragedy. These diplomatic conversations were important for maintaining the international relationships that would be crucial for Britain's recovery and future security. Kate played a significant role in these discussions, her cultural sensitivity and communication skills helping to strengthen bonds with allies around the world. As evening approached, William and Kate returned to Windsor Castle for a quiet dinner with close family members who had supported them throughout the difficult week. The gathering was subdued but warm, providing an opportunity to reflect on what had been accomplished and to begin planning for the long-term recovery efforts that would define their public service in the years ahead. The immediate crisis was concluding, but both understood that the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. Their final act of the day was a private moment of reflection in the castle chapel, where they offered prayers for the victims, their families, and the nation as a whole. The quiet spiritual time provided closure to the formal mourning period, while also preparing them mentally and emotionally for the challenges that lay ahead. They had successfully guided Britain through its darkest hour, but the true measure of their leadership would be determined by how effectively they could help their people build a better future from the foundations of their shared grief and renewed purpose.